Okay, hi everyone, welcome. As I said, it's great to see some new faces and some, I won't say older faces, maybe I'll say familiar faces, so that you can join in us here today. As I said, we've got Naomi with us. Naomi has written a book that I kind of fell in love with, Raising Kids with Hidden Disabilities, Getting It. And Naomi will share a little bit about it, and I'll even read a little excerpt from it now in a few minutes. Let me tell you the official kind of blurb about Naomi so that you can get a bit of understanding of her background. There's Naomi Simmons was named by the Times as one of the top 10 authors of the decade. She's a global best-selling author of books for children, parents, and teachers on language learning and speech development. None of this, however, prepared her for the challenges of parenting children with a range of hidden disabilities, including autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. This took her life and writing in a new direction to find the answers to the questions on how do we raise our kids with hidden disabilities. Now that's the official part, and rightly so, and I think that's valid, but I will say that after having a few Zoom chats with Naomi, she totally gets it, as being a parent herself, and I kind of feel like it's a bit of a kindred spirit here, Naomi, that we all kind of are at the same place, and we're all trying to support each other and learning from each other as we go along. So I wanted to, before Naomi kind of starts, just read a little blurb from the introduction that kind of, I remember one day I shared it in one of the parent support sessions. And by the way, I'm Jo, I'm the family support practitioner here at SensationALL. For those that haven't actually met me, I think there's a few faces that I don't recognize. And I read this part to the session, and everybody kind of had one of those aha moments of, wow, this is great. And I kind of made the point that this is just part of the introduction. You know, there's lots of other chapters there, so this is just part of the introduction. So let me read it to you, and this is kind of, I think Naomi will tell us differently later on if it is, but part of the reason why Naomi wrote the book. So it says, Naomi was, I'll just kind of say where she is at the point. She was talking about how you know, she'd looked everywhere for parenting advice on how to deal with different situations with her children and how to kind of raise her children. And it says everyone and their dog had an opinion about what I should be doing and what I was apparently doing wrong. Every time my child had a meltdown, I felt like I was personally failing as a parent. The more I tried to follow the advice I was given, the worse things got. I felt judged and like a total failure. I felt like I was letting myself and my children down. The light bulb moment came when I realized that the reason nothing was working was that the parenting advice was designed for children without hidden disabilities, often known as neurotypical children. Most of the people giving me the advice had never walked in my shoes and didn't really know or understand my children or me. This applied to many professionals and experts too, who in my experience are unlikely to have children with hidden disabilities themselves. And so once I heard that, I kind of went, yeah, this lady gets it. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand over to Naomi. Welcome to SensationALL and to Aberdeen, and it's over to you. Thanks.
Hello. Am I on speaker mode?
Yep, you are. We can hear you. It's all good.
Oh, wonderful.
Go
okay,
ahead.
I've got no indication on here what's going on. I just wanted to make sure. So hello, and it's just so lovely. It's been so many years since I have been able to sit down and have a cup of coffee with a group of lovely ladies who have walked or are walking the same shoes as me. People who are likely to also be suffering from extreme levels of stress while adoring our beautiful children and wanting to do with all our hearts to do the absolute best and be the absolute best mums we possibly can be. So that is a huge privilege to be sitting down in this lovely environment I say lovely environment, obviously in person would be even more lovely, but we're here together and we're having a cup of coffee. And what is the most important thing for me is that we are here together to talk about how do we recognize, how do we deal with these challenges that we're dealing with every single day from a perspective that is positive, constructive, so real-time tips, what is really constructive, and most importantly for me, hopeful. Because when I was going through it, and I must admit I still am, my kids are grown up, but their neurology will not change. Their neurology will not change. Is everything okay? Because yeah, their neurology will not change, but their ways of dealing with it will change. And their ways of dealing with it as they go through life will change directly based on how much they understand and accept themselves. Yeah, understand and accept themselves doesn't mean trying to change who they are, but understanding where are my strengths, where are my challenges, how can I work with those challenges? So that's how their life is going to be panning out. And as parents, that's what we need to, I discovered we needed to be doing. It all needs to be about understanding our children rather than judging our children. Yeah. And just a little bit of an overview of how I got to this place. My children's difficulties, it was 7 years before my kids got diagnosed. It was, and then during that time, as well as all the problems at home, and I was dealing with very extreme meltdowns, rages. One of my children has bipolar disorder as well as autism, OCD, everything, really bad depression. The other one wasn't reading or writing and was locked in his bedroom, what seemed like for years, wouldn't go, you know, all the stuff that I'm sure you guys are living and breathing to a lesser or greater extent. So I'm not going to go into the details of that because that's quite triggering. But during that time, my fight was, I need to get an assessment. I need to know what's going on. So my emphasis was on that. And yeah, it was heartbreaking because I was dealing with that at the same time as dealing with my children. And when the diagnoses did come, I had a list of about 10 of them. And it was, right, that's validation. It's not that I'm a bad person. It's not that I'm a bad mother. My child is wired slightly differently neurologically, both my children, in a way that means that they process the world slightly differently. And we need to work with that, yeah, in our parenting, our education. So I got the diagnoses, and I got it from Great Ormond Street, which is the authority. And I'm sure you guys will have had very similar experiences. Most of my friends who have been through this had the same experience. You get the diagnostic letter that gets sent to your GP, and you might get a copy so you can let your school have it. And then you say, okay, thank you for that. Now what? The problems are persisting. The problems don't go away at diagnosis. You've now got validation and some framework for understanding, but the meltdowns were daily, the self-harming was daily, they locked in the bedroom for weeks daily. We now had some names for it. So I'd say, what next? How do I manage this on a day-to-day basis at home? I have to live with this day every day. My daughter was melting down at night, and my daughter, one was at night and one was during the day, and I had to work. I was a single mum. And it was, what do I do? How do I manage a meltdown? How do I manage a total shutdown? Are they different? Are they the same? Is it because I'm a bad mother? How do I manage any of it? Anyway, all I got was, well, just do what you think. And I pushed for it. And eventually I was honoured to be given a sheet of A4 paper that says, if you are having extreme difficulties, call the Samaritans. And they gave the number for the Samaritans. And I think they gave the number for the National Autistic Society, the website, and said, but they'll only help you with the autism bit, because my children had 10 different diagnoses. Most people, if they're neurodiverse, they're going to fit into different categories to different extent. our brain is not divided into the ADHD bit, the ASD bit, the OCD bit. If the wiring is slightly atypical, it's likely there's going to be elements of many. So they gave me the details of the National Autistic Society and said, but they may be able to help you, but only with that aspect. I thought, okay. And I went on the website and it gave me information about autism, which I'd obviously read about. But again, how do I manage a child who will not go to school? How do I manage a child who will not wear socks? How do I manage a teacher who wants to punish my child for not wearing socks? Bearing in mind that the effort to get that child into school probably was a week's worth of energy for that child and me. You finally get them in and they want to punish that child. Not, oh my God, you've got in, amazing, considering your hidden disability. No, those are the wrong socks. So how do you manage any of this? And it was question after question after question. And I don't know how many of you are aware that research has shown that parents, when they say parents, if you look at the fine print, it was actually mothers. Unless it was a single father for whatever reason, who are raising children with hidden disabilities. And I'm using the word generically because regardless of the diagnosis, most of our children will have a range. Maybe not now, but as they go through life, a lot of them will pick up more or think, oh, this fits more than the other. Parents raising kids with hidden disabilities, actually the research was on autism, actually I now remember right, have the same levels of stress hormones circulating in our bodies. I'm going to make it personal because this is about us, in our bodies as combat soldiers. No, I don't mean post-combat, people that come out of combat, people in combat, sitting there in a gun under fire, right? We have the same levels of stress hormones. They're not probably going to be as high as if we're under fire all the time, although they probably are at times when our child is attacking us or melting down, or when we're triggered. I could be triggered to that level of stress by a judgmental look from a teacher, even from another parent looking at the school gate as I was trying to get my kid out of the car with socks on. And I would be, but it's an incredibly important thing. We are dealing with something big for us, and it needs to be taken seriously. And I don't want to belittle the combat experience, but for most people in combat, most soldiers, eventually they come out of combat. Many have post-traumatic stress disorder, which is treatable. I'm not belittling it, it's huge. It is treatable with the right therapies. We don't come out of it. Yeah, ours is a kind of life combat. So it's really, really important we work out how we are going to be in combat probably for the rest of our lives. So we could moan and whinge about it and get very upset and negative, or we can think, right, that's the challenge. How are we going to be calm, happy, and have wonderful lives in this situation, and help our children have happy, productive, wonderful lives where they are happy in their own skin, they love themselves, they love who they are. Let's hope love their neurodivergence, because neurodivergence presents the most amazing, I'm not going to say always, it all depends on attitude, can present the most amazing gifts ever. When we look at history, the biggest innovators, the biggest talents are generally neurodiverse. And I'm not going to say I'm one of the biggest talents in the world, but I would include myself in that category. While I was trying to find out what the hell was going on with my children, the more I was finding out, the more, that resonates, that resonates, that resonates, that resonates. And then looking back at my family, oh my goodness, that poor relative who was completely shunned by the family, neurodivergent, but they didn't know it, so they shunned the person. I've got a cousin that spent all her life in a psychiatric hospital from the age of 13. Oh, if we'd understood what was going on with her, maybe her life would have been different. So yes, there's combat stress. We love and adore our kids. We want the best for them and for ourselves. If we do not put our own life jacket on first, we cannot support our children. You probably know the announcement that's made every time you get on a plane. Yeah, our kids need us at this moment. So we do need to find techniques and ways that we can give our children the possibility of a happy, productive life in their own, where they're happy in their own skin. So that could mean financial success, it could mean academic success, it could, as long as they're happy in their own skin, I don't think it matters personally. And that's what matters, self-acceptance. And that means acceptance of the challenges, they do exist and they will exist. And then really, really celebrating and working with the strengths, which are two sides of the same coin, usually. Actually, no, always. So that's what was going on. So that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted. And I needed hope. And my mood was getting down, lower and lower and lower. I was suffering from really bad anxiety. I was blaming myself. I felt hopeless. I tried to look for help in my family, but to be honest, a lot of the people there had repressed neurodivergence themselves, and their coping mechanism was rejection. It's you, blame, 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 blame. And like a lot of mothers, we seem to be kind of hardwired to blame ourselves, and I was no exception. I was going down fast, and I prayed that I kept looking for books. There must be a book on how do you raise kids with hidden disabilities. And I couldn't find one. And I looked and looked and looked. And there were books there's some lovely books on Asperger's, as it was called then, and dyslexia, which my son has, ADD. But they were written by doctors or psychologists explaining, you recognize it by these things and this and the other, and the treatments are, and most of the treatments that were advocated are not available to us. They're kind of American things, and none of it answered those questions. How do I deal with this in the home? How do I help my child to be happy in their own skin and let their gifts shine? None of them answered that question. Those writers were they're really helpful from a medical point of view of understanding the diagnosis, but they hadn't walked in our shoes. They weren't dealing with this every day. They didn't know how you deal with in 3 in the morning when your child comes in screaming and you're asleep and you've got to work the next day. They hadn't dealt with any of that stuff. I think there must be something. And I did find a few things written by parents, which looked hopeful. But sadly, although it was lovely to know that other parents were going through it, they were kind of trauma stories. So people talking about how hard their life was raising their children. It was so hard. This happened and that happened. This person didn't understand. The schools didn't get it. So I had to abandon those books. They were triggering me. I felt a lot of compassion for those parents. I was looking for hope, strategies and understanding. I couldn't find it anywhere. So I knew things were going down fast with both my children, to the extent that one of them was, I was being told, was going to be one was going to be sent to a young offenders unit, because they decided her meltdowns were so loud, street heard, and it was being perceived as behaviour, as bad behaviour, out of, public order behaviour, and they were going to take her away. My other child was in permanent detention for completely switching off at school. He still couldn't read or write at the age of 12, and again they were treating that as bad behaviour to be corrected. And actually the big blessing was when I got the diagnosis, because then I could say, this is a symptom of their condition. It's not behavior, it's a symptom. Would you be punishing my children if they were in a wheelchair and they were displaying symptoms of their disability in that way? So if a child is epileptic and is having a seizure, would you put them in detention or send them to a young offenders unit? No, you would recognize this is part of this child's disability. What can we do to help? So having the diagnosis was a huge, huge tool. It validated that we were talking about something neurological. but because it was invisible, it was very, very hard to get people on board. So I didn't know what to do. People didn't understand, and people were bombarding me with advice, parenting advice. And I found that and I thought it made me feel even more inadequate, because yes, I tried everything, all those boundary issues. You should be more consistent. How can you be more consistent if your child is just about to go into a meltdown one moment and is happy the next moment? Would you impose a consequence just when they're calm for something they did maybe an hour ago that they cannot remember? It just didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. And if my son wasn't engaging with study, is shaming him going to help him, or do we need to find out what are his stimulation needs? He has ADD and dyslexia, as well as high functioning autism. How are we going to grab, what is going to stimulate him? But it was all not seen, because we're talking about invisible disabilities. People would fall back into those patterns of treating our children as if they were neurotypical, with that kind of dog training approach. You give them a treat if they're a good girl or a good boy, and you ignore them or you punish them. They don't use the word punish these days, they call it a consequence. I don't quite see the difference between the two, unless it's a natural consequence, that your child will learn to not be autistic, to not be ADHD, if you do not show them any attention when they are displaying symptoms. But can you imagine that being said to a child with a visible disability? Well, what do you expect? Your child who can't see, well, what do you expect? You gave them glasses, you're enabling their sight problem. You're giving them attention. So when they're having trouble seeing, why don't you just put them on the naughty step? But that's effectively what's happening with our children all the time. They're being treated like neurotypical children. I could not find help anywhere, and I was absolutely desperate. And things had got so bad. And for me, the potential of losing my child to a situation where they still wouldn't recognise her needs was so serious. If they were going to remove her to a residential setting that was going to be helping her with her hidden disabilities, I could have been convinced if I thought it would help her, but not to an environment like that. Hypersensitive to be among criminals. Can you imagine? I knew I had to do something fast, and I couldn't find anyone to help me. So I decided, who do I want to speak to? I tried a few experts I could find, and they had no advice on parenting. Beautiful organisations like SensationALL and Joe, either they didn't exist or I didn't know about them at that time. I can't imagine anything more wonderful than having sat down with Joe, or probably any of you ladies, at that time, but that wasn't available. So I started looking for young adults, sort of early 20s, who were neurodivergent. Okay, I'm using that in the broadest possible sense, neurodivergent. People tend to use the word neurodivergent to mean high-functioning autism, but I'm not using it in that way. Neurodivergent, atypical brain wiring, which can result in late diagnoses like ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, even things like what we consider psychiatric, like bipolar disorder, even some personality disorders. All of those things result from an atypical, I'm not going to say something wrong with it, an atypical one. I wanted to find young adults who are happy in their own skin and doing great, who had those diagnoses. And then I wanted to ask them, because they were only young adults, they'd recently emerged from childhood and adolescence, what helped you growing up? Yeah. And I was curious, are they going to talk about a particular therapy they had had? What helped you? But there's things I couldn't control. I couldn't really control the school environment. I couldn't control the medical environment. I could go and shout at them if I wanted to. I could take them to court. I could fight, but I had so little energy, and I wanted to use that energy to help my children, not to fight the system. At that time, I might feel differently when things move on. So I wanted to know, what helped you at home when you were growing up? Because look at you. And that's what I did, and I started, and it started inspiring. So I spoke to maybe 2 or 3 that I found, because they were people who had Facebook accounts where they put on their bios that they are neurodivergent. That word didn't exist at that time. That's quite a new word. So they put that they all had Asperger's or ADHD, and they were wearing it like a flag of honor. That was the flag that they're people I could speak to, 22, 23-year-olds. And yes, they wanted to speak. And yes, they had a hell of a lot to share. What my parents did that really, really made a difference. What my parents did that made things infinitely worse. And that inspired me more than anything. These were the experts for me. Although they weren't parents, and one became a parent, so that became very, very interesting. When one person, you may know Danny, I don't know his surname, he runs an organisation called Asperger's Experts. He's got a child, so he had to see it from both sides. He really struggled growing up, but he's gone on to form an amazing company. He has a lot of, amazing company. They were all successful people who were proud of who they are, proud of their neurodivergent. So I asked them, what helped you the most? Yeah. And I wrote it all down. And at that time, I was looking for tips for my own kids and hope. So just the fact that I was talking to these young, beautiful, clever, creative, insightful young adults gave me hope, just that they existed. Because when you go to some of the support groups, you just think it's hopeless. You just think it's hopeless. What's going to happen? So just knowing that these people existed immediately raised my vibe. Yes, it's possible. And if they can do it, maybe my children can do it as well. So they gave me hope, and they gave me strategies, and they told me what made things worse for them. And everyone was absolutely unanimous. While they wanted structure, because structure makes children feel secure, very, very clear what they needed to help them to flourish. And it just became very, very clear. Validation of the challenges without judgment, and absolutely fanning talents, abilities, anything the person likes, and acceptance, complete acceptance. So we can, it was very, very clear. I also spoke to, I sought out parents of children who were older. So I managed to connect just through word of mouth. Oh, you need to speak to, I can't remember the person's name, it's somebody who worked for the National Autistic Society, or had worked, who then put me in touch with other parents. It was informal networking. I couldn't do anything officially. Parents about my age, whose children were now in their early 20s, were doing amazingly, right? So, but I had walked in my shoes, in our shoes. We're all living this. And I got put in touch with some of these, they weren't all absolute hell when their kids were growing up. And it isn't just absolute hell, it's real, it's combat stress. And their children were, and they were hearing what those children were doing. Some had excelled amazingly in their professions and were married and having relationships, conscious relationships. And to have relationships, if you're neurodivergent, requires a lot of self-knowledge, an amazing level. You have to really know yourself. And be able to express that to your partner, and likewise, it's absolutely possible. I'm in a neurodivergent relationship. My husband is also neurodivergent, but he's ADHD. And the conversations we have are amazing. And I think our relationship is stronger because of it. So it's all possible. So I spoke to these parents whose kids were doing great. Some were working as academics. Some were working in coffee shops, but people that they thought were never going to ever leave their bedroom ever were working in coffee shops. But the important thing is not whether they were academics or working in coffee shops, or in one case, one mother was so delighted that her son was really happy. It's being happy in your own skin. He didn't feel that going into the workplace on a professional basis was going to work for him because his stress levels he was so sensitive to sensory issues and stress. He didn't think he could probably do it for a day or two and then he would become overwhelmed. But what he was doing, he was volunteering in a community garden 3 times a week and absolutely loving it. And he just absolutely loved being with the plants, and the people there were gentle. He loved that. And then he came home and he had an alternative world at home, which was through his computer games, where he had a whole community of people, and they would meet and compete through virtual reality kind of games and get a lot of self-esteem and status in that way. And he had a whole social network virtually that he personally, he was, obviously we're talking spectrums, he was relatively high up on the autism spectrum. And for him, social interaction that's virtual was much less threatening. And especially if you can do it through avatars, it was just much, much less stressful. So he got his social life that way, and he was out and about and having low impact contact through his gardening. He was super happy, really happy in his own skin, proud to be neurodivergent, proud to be himself. And that was a wonderful outcome, plus the ones that had gone on to become university professors. Again, it just raised my vibe again. Hope, hope, hope. It's possible for my kids. Yeah. I actually think it's possible for all our kids. All our kids. If we're clear what we're hoping for, if our hope is for we've got some aspiration that our child is going to be this and the other professionally, if our hope is that we're going to have a particular relationship with them, if our hope is that they will never have meltdowns again, that yeah, we're like, that's probably not going to raise our vibe hugely, unless they tick those boxes. But if we keep it quite general, our child to accept themselves, accept their neurodivergence, find their passions, find their strengths, but most importantly, acknowledge their challenges. Yeah. Not over focus on them, because some of the professionals, they only focus on the challenges. So what can we do about, I don't know if you know the term executive function disorder. I hadn't heard of it. It's when you're a chaotic mess. Many of our kids have executive function disorder. Their brains are so busy dealing with with day-to-day life, they do not have the capacity to organize themselves, their time, their reading book, their school bag. They won't remember to put underpants on. They won't remember where they're meant to be when. All of that. And they probably won't remember what homework they are going to need to do. And if you do manage to get them to do it, it's likely to end up crumpled at the bottom of the bag. So they'll focus on the challenges, which, unless your child is really open to learning and really accepts themselves, they're probably not going to really learn much from that. So yes, it was very much what was I saying? Yeah, focusing on their passions and their strengths. So I got so much hope. And at that time, I had no idea that I would be writing a book about this. And then all the treatment things. I was offered antipsychotics for my daughter and drugs for my son. And I thought, I don't know what to do. I felt guilty about giving these drugs. I felt guilty about not giving these drugs. And if you spoke to doctors, they would just say, take. If you spoke to other parents, other people would say, no way. So how do you make that decision? So again, I needed to research what are the pros and cons of each approach, and are there any alternatives to drugs? And I need to have a clear pathway. How do I manage my attitude to treatments? Are treatments appropriate at all? We're talking about acceptance. So I had so many questions, and I got a lot of help from all those interactions. And also, I was very lucky to have 2 professionals I met much later when I did start writing the book. One is a very senior consultant in neurodivergent, what it wasn't called that then, autism spectrum and ADHD, who I was able to talk to. But she said she had nothing to offer about parenting. She also would give them the same sheet of paper. But I wanted to talk to her, and she referred me to a very senior psychiatrist who specializes in medication. So I managed to have a talk with her But I also wanted to know about other alternatives. So I researched that and tried those on my children as well, because I personally decided I'm not going to say no to medication, but I want to try alternatives first. Yeah. So that was my feeling on that. So I didn't know I'd be writing a book. So I started trying out the approaches that I was hearing from all these people on my own children, using them as guinea pigs, and on myself, because I'm very clear that I have so many of the challenges myself. And when my child has a meltdown, I have a meltdown. Internally, I might not go around smashing things up and screaming, but I repress it because I want to be a good mother who doesn't lose it. We all lose it. If you're in combat stress, we all lose it. And any parent, even if they haven't got children with hidden disabilities, will lose it. Otherwise, they're a psychopath. Anyone that doesn't have any reaction to that level of attack, emotional attack, I'm not talking about, maybe physical attack's easier actually, emotional attack from our children, from our schools, from our family. If you don't have any emotional reaction to that, then you're probably neurodiverse in a different way, in the sense that you probably have some part of your brain not working, the emotional part. So yeah, we all lose it. Some people lose it externally and then get really condemned because you've said terrible things or done terrible things. Most of us lose it internally. I must admit there have been occasions when I've lost it externally, because I'm a human being and my buttons can only be pressed so many times before I will also have a meltdown. Mostly we hold it in, which is probably one of the reasons we get so sick. We've got very, very high rates of chronic and acute illness. I've got some statistics on that, which I don't want to frighten you with. We hold it in, so we all lose it. I'm losing the thread of what I was saying. Yeah, so on one of the occasions I had just lost it and things were really bad in the house. I was starting to use the strategies, but I was feeling guilty. Who am I to apply these strategies? I need someone to give me permission to do this. Everyone's telling me to do consequences and rewards. Am I just not doing the consequences and rewards well enough? Should I be stricter? Should I be less strict? But I just thought, this isn't working. I've got to try. And I made a decision. If I ever find my way out of this absolute nightmare, actually, the only word I mean, it's not like you're a nurse dealing with children with these difficulties, or a teacher. These are the people that are the most important things in your life. You adore these children. Yeah. Our identity is as a mother, as a nurturer. If I could ever find a way through this so that my children are leading happy, meaningful lives, happy in their own skin, and I am released from my combat stress, there is nothing I won't do to make sure that other parents going through this I would like to share that with everybody who needs to know it. Yeah. I made that pledge to myself, and I remember it was like at 3 a.m. with tears running down my eyes, feeling like a complete failure. I think one of my children was melting down in one of the rooms, smashing up things. And I made that pledge, and I think I even wrote it down as a pledge. And that's what I'm honouring now. And once I'd made that pledge, I'm going to write the book that I needed to read at that time. Yeah, I'm going to write it. Whether people read it is up to them. It may not resonate with people. You might read my book and think, nah, doesn't resonate with me at all. A lot of people like the idea of the, tough love approach, punish them and knock it out of them, basically. Or I don't believe it's a hidden disability, it's just bad behavior. People have a whole load of views. Like I said, everyone, is it their cat or their dog? Everyone and their dog has an opinion. But if it resonates, I hope it helps, because I learned through so many, I learned it by making mistakes and judging myself for them. So if there's anything there that resonates and helps, wonderful. If when you read it, if you choose to, there's bits that you think, I'm not sure about that, that doesn't feel right for me, wonderful, absolutely wonderful, because that means you're thinking critically, yeah, which is what we need to do. There is no blueprint. There are a set of principles we can look at when parenting our kids. There is no formula. So if you read my book or any book, you can think, that resonates. Actually, I really don't think that does resonate. I'm going to we come back and think about that, and it may be complete, you may not be right for your circumstance, or you may just think it's wrong, then that's absolutely wonderful. But if people can take away anything from it, I feel that I will have fulfilled my pledge. What I didn't expect, the book was published this time last year, and I was in hospital. Wasn't going to share this, but I will, because I feel like I'm here with my sisters. I was diagnosed with breast cancer just before my book was due to be published, and I had a whole plan of what we were going to do about it. And it ended up being a bit more complicated. I was in hospital on morphine, hardly conscious when it came out. So I wasn't able to do anything for rather a long time. But I am still going to, so I don't know what's really been happening since, but I am going to absolutely do everything I can to fulfill that pledge now. I'm better and recovered, that anything I learned from all those conversations can help you guys. That's what I want to do with my life from now on. And there's a lot I don't know. I'm open to learning more. The more people I speak to, the more I learn. Anything that I learn, I think, could help others. I want to share it, because we need to be a sisterhood. That sounds really sexist, because is there a word that's gender neutral for that? Brotherhood, sisterhood, siblinghood, maybe. Siblinghood. We are a siblinghood. We are all in combat. If you are in combat in a war situation, you have your, what is the little collective group? Battalion or regiment for mutual support. We're stuck in our own homes. So we do need our sisterhood, and we need it to be beyond, let's compare trauma stories, let's whinge and vent. Venting has its place, but it lowers the vibe. It really does. What can we do together collectively to raise our vibe, share what works, what helps? I've been talking too much. I'm just going to quickly share about what happened with my own kids. It may help, it may not. For me, it was about happy in your own skin and following their dreams and passions, which may have been growing things. For me, it's growing things. I'm a bit obsessed. I've got a lot of high functioning autism traits, and for my special thing is growing things. So I grow things and I pick plants everywhere. I obsess about plants. That's my thing. And when I'm happiest going around identifying wild plants. That's my personal thing. But for my kids, my son, I'm going to tell you about my little boy who's now 24. I'm not going to go, I have to be careful. He'd kill me if I told him too much, but I am here with are we all women? Can I say sisters? Okay, I'm here with my sisters, so I'm going to share this. I don't know what you call it in Scotland, but in England, there's this, I'm going to say it, I'm going to be honest, a horrible thing called SATs, which they're meant to take when they're 5, when they're 7, and when they're 10. It's not for the children, it's to show so that the school can get ranked in a league table based on how many children get grade 4 and above in English and maths, to show that the school is successfully teaching the children. And they have an exception for children with, learning difficulties. So they said, they called me in and said, we need to, our statistics are quite high, so we'd rather your son doesn't take the SATs. We're going to put in a special exemption because he is a child of low ability. He's a child of low ability. They wouldn't accept his dyslexia or anything at that time. They didn't like the idea. They said, no, we don't like to label children. If we accepted the label of dyslexia, that would be labeling our child. That would be abusive, and it would be wrong to label our child. So instead, we're going to label your child as low ability, and you just need to accept that your child's low ability. You're just trying to use the word dyslexia to get over the fact that your child is low ability. And maybe you should try reading to your child, then they might learn to read. And I started feeling guilty. Do I read enough? And then I remembered, actually, Naomi Simmons, you write reading schemes. I write reading schemes. English is a foreign language, but also used elsewhere. And at that time, I'd sold 300 million of them. So I know a bit about teaching literacy. But even though I knew I was a top professional, in literacy teaching, the mother guilt took over, whoosh. And even though I knew that, the brain shut down, because when we're under stress, our thinking brain shuts down. We know that biologically, so we shouldn't beat ourselves up if when we're under attack or being criticized and stressed, we cannot think. It's natural, it's a natural fight or flight response. So when that happened, I immediately thought, oh my God, am I getting it wrong? Am I not reading to my child properly? And they weren't going to do his SATs. But then when my stress came down, my thinking brain kicked back in again. And I just thought, right, he can't stay at this school. He was in year 5. I don't know how things translate in Scotland. So he was 10. It was the year before high school. And I just started to earn a bit of money from my books. I don't know if any of you have experience of being a writer, it takes years before you start generating any income from writing. So just starting to generate a bit. And I got him into a Montessori school for a year, just to do year 6, where it was individualized teaching. So they teaching based on individual need, not based on what were, a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think he was in a very small class, and it was absolutely wonderful. So he was 10, and the first thing they did is we need to raise his confidence about reading. So they made him a teaching assistant in the reception class. So they had him helping the 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds to learn to read, which raised his confidence because he could read. Although he had challenges with reading, he could read a lot better than a 4-year-old. And I'd go in to collect him, and he had little 4-year-old children climbing all over him, and he was cuddling them, and they loved him, and his confidence rose. For the first time ever, he would go to school without a battle. And they started teaching him using my books. So every day, and they started using a word shark system. I think it's called Word Shark, which is a specific literacy program for dyslexics. And they did that with him every morning, worked on his confidence, and for the wider literacy stuff, they used my books, which happened to have pictures of him in it because he participated in them. Anyway, they did do his SATs. He did take his SATs. He's severely dyslexic, as well as his other issues, which I've mentioned earlier. And I'm happy to say he got his level 5. So, which is the top level. So there was no equivalent for high school of this school, and I couldn't have afforded it, to be honest. So I thought, right, now he can start mainstream secondary school knowing he's got a 5 in his SATs. So at least he can start off there on an even playing field, and I'll see what I can do from there on for recognition of his issues. He went to high school and okay for the first year, and then it slipped. He started off in the middle set, ended up in the bottom set. Again, they were treating it as behavior. He was on permanent detention. At the time, his only interest, he was passionate about filmmaking. And when he was 11, I found that because I got so much advice on that from adults with hidden disabilities. Fan the passion. So for his, I think, 11th birthday, I bought him I had no money, a little secondhand little digital video camera. And he made a film. He wrote the film himself, somehow managed to physically write it. And he made it with all of us in it. And I just thought, oh, I think that's rather good. And I did actually, with his permission, submit it to some festivals. It won first prize at Peckham Film Festival, first prize at, about 10 different festivals. And he ended up being screened at BFI. So this is with no mention at all of his hidden disability. So I tried to get the school on board because he was doing so badly. And I said, can he do some of his assignments on video or using his skills on film? But they wouldn't listen. So he was going downhill again very, very fast. And also all the behavioural problems were kicking in again. Whereas my daughter would have external meltdowns. My son, it was much more shutdowns. And I didn't know until later that meltdowns and shutdowns are both explosive responses to huge overwhelm, one expressed outwardly and one expressed inwardly. There is the same response to the similar stimuli, and I didn't know that at all. I knew he couldn't stay at that school, but I couldn't home educate because I was a single mum and a working mum, and if I stopped work, the whole everything, you know, it wasn't an option for me not to work. I looked at the benefit possibilities, and I would have lost my home. We would have ended up in some bed and breakfast somewhere. So no, I was going to find a way of carrying on working. And also when I was very privileged, I was a writer, and I was just about earning enough, so I could make it work if I worked through the night and what have you. But home educating is not possible if you're also working and you haven't got a husband or family support. It just wasn't a possibility. Luckily, a creative arts, one of those state school opened near us when he was 14, which called itself a non-academic school, a technical school, where they were going to focus on creative arts. But they made it clear this is not a school you go to if you have any academic aspirations. At that time, I just thought, please fuel his filmmaking, please. That's all I care about. We're only going to reach him that way. And he went there. It was a really chaotic school. It had one of the worst academic records in the UK. It might have been the worst. But they really focused on creativity. So all his GCSEs were creative. They made him do English because GCSE, because I think legally you had to. And because we had the diagnosis, he was able to use technology for his written assignments, and he got double the time. He was able to dictate his answers. And to be honest, because he was able to express his creativity, he suddenly wanted to write essays. Yeah. And if he didn't have to worry about how you spell something, he could just let his ideas go from his brain out without having to filter it through what is the grammar, how do I spell this? Because the schools before that had been so focused on how do you spell it rather than what are you trying to express. He let these ideas just flow naturally. Anyway, he then told me when he was 15, only a year later, I want to go to Edinburgh University because they take 10 students a year to become to do the film director degree, and you do a minor where you can do another subject. And I said, oh, right, that might be nice. You could do maybe photography, or I was thinking something. No, I'm going to do history and politics if I get in there. I said, okay. So he went and spoke to the headmaster. He went to an appointment and said, I want to do this. I want to go and do the film direction degree in University of Edinburgh. They only take 10. And the guy I just laughed and said, it's lovely that you have aspirations. It's lovely. And just said, well, looking at your grades, I don't think you'll be very lucky to get in anyway, but we have got special contacts at the University of Hertfordshire where you can get onto a degree with ease. Yeah. So maybe you could consider that. If you work really, really hard, you might get into the University of Hertfordshire with ease. And he came in and said, am I allowed to swear on this? Probably best not. He said, no, because it's being recorded. I don't want us to have problems with that. He said, F that, mum. I'm going to the University of Edinburgh. And again, I didn't want to quash his aspirations too much. I wanted to fan it, but I also knew his grade average at that time was around E. So he said, no, I've decided. And that is one of the huge strengths of ADHD, which is now ADD is now being assimilated into. And ASD is when you're on passion, you are on passion. And people can call being on passion being stubborn, or you can reframe it, reframe stubborn as determined, and he was on passion. So now he had his aim, and he was 15. We went straight up to Edinburgh for the open day, and he was there with all the 17, 18-year-olds hoping to go in. I just said, let's come and see. And he goes, I'm going here or nowhere. Oh, okay, no pressure. I would like a plan B, plan C, plan E, especially seeing as everything. Anyway, long story short, he's a clever boy. He realised if he was going to get through his A-levels, well, his GCSEs, he did actually revise the day before, and he did reasonably well. Bearing in mind, he has no time management skills. So the idea of preparing in advance and having a revision schedule is absolutely impossible. He stayed up each night before each exam, and yes, he got an A for film because it was practical, and the film he made was brilliant. And the others, I think he got B's and C's, nothing less than a C for anything. So he was like, oh my God, if I could get those grades with no revision at all and without studying, does that mean I could possibly get good A-levels? Does that mean that? So we thought, let's try. So that so for A-levels, he goes, well, I can't work consistently. I'm not wired that way. I need a certain amount of adrenaline to get me going, and I need a clear objective. So I need to work smart, not just work hard. So he's a clever boy. He got for each of the and he decided to do English for his A-level. So he did English, photography, and film. He applied to Edinburgh. The school would not support his application. They said, no, we can't support you. They had to give predicted grades of 3 A's. He went in there and he just dealt with it. He went straight in there really assertively and somehow convinced them literally minutes before the UCAS deadline to give him those predicted grades. And they did it. He got all the past papers. He got the examiner's reports to see what you needed to say for each question type to get an A. So, and it's actually quite a good sheet. I don't know why the teachers don't do this. So in the question for this one, the examiner report said, students that mentioned X, Y, Z were exceptional, A grade students. So he just learnt all that probably the day before, and he got into Edinburgh. He didn't get 3 A's, he got a B in photography because the exam system downgraded the entire cohort grade. They go in with practical subjects, and if they don't like some of the marking, they downgrade everybody respective of their individual. So he missed a grade, but because his school was the worst performing school in the country, luckily the University of Edinburgh would said that they would accept him anyway, because they had a 1 grade margin for children from low achieving schools. So he got in, and he had a wonderful time in Edinburgh. And he was so inspired by, I'm going to say this, children of his intelligence, actually, because he was in a whole mindset of I'm low ability and started to believe that about himself. Suddenly being around all these bright, interesting people, going to debating, and for him, the ADHD was far more prominent than the autism spectrum. So hyperstimulation is good for my son. So being in noisy environments is good for my son, opposite for my other child. Anyway, he chose for his elective for the 3rd year to do history and politics, like he said. They said no, because he didn't even have a GCSE, which is at age 16. He hadn't studied history since he was 14, or any other academic subject apart from English. So they said, no, this is the University of Edinburgh. Everyone here will have an A star in politics and history. You know, why are we going to accept? He somehow had the gift of it. He wangled his way onto it. So he did a year of history and politics. He knew he couldn't read all the books, so because he can hardly read, but he also learned that by reading the introduction, the conclusion, and finding a couple of examples. That was all he needed, as long as he could have a good analysis. Anyway, he graduated last year with a first from the University of Edinburgh, first class degree. And without going into too much details, he is now, he's been identified as one of the top up and coming film directors in the world. Plus, he is he's a musician as well. His other passion was always music. He didn't have to choose, so he's also he makes music videos for bands. He's just about to sign to, he was with a major label, because he writes and produces music, and he does that to relax. So when the film work is too much pressure, he'll write songs for bands or for his band. So he's an amazing, and he's a lovely, open-hearted person, and he's very, very open about his neurodivergence and the strength, and he's worked to his strengths. And one of the lovely things is he works in the film industry, so he's in and music industry, and he sort of says, I've yet to meet anyone I respect in this industry who is not neurodivergent. We need to be neurodivergent to do this amazing stuff. People who really are neurotypical will follow instructions, follow protocols, follow rules, might be very intelligent in some ways, but the kind of out-the-box thinking that we need to create completely new paradigms, you kind of need to be neurodivergent for that. And to succeed, we need to acknowledge our challenges. So I will not attempt to sit and write an essay by hand. I would find what other ways. And it all comes from self-belief. So he's very open. He made a little video for me when my book came out, and it was a surprise when I came out of hospital. You might have seen it. I think Joe's seen it. Just a little animation to publicise the book. He wanted to be featured in it. I didn't tell his full story because I didn't know how he'd feel about it, because he's so that's a story of hope. I'm not sharing it as I'm a boastful mum. I'm a boastful mum, look how well my kid is doing. I'm sharing it as hope because when I was going through this, I wanted hope, yeah? And my other daughter, whose needs are infinitely more severe because of the bipolar, just a very, very quick one, because I know I'm talking too long. They wouldn't let her do GCSE, full GCSE maths at school. I don't know what GCSE is called in Scotland, but it's what you take it at 16 that enables you to then do your A levels and then go to university. And she wanted to do maths at university, like a lot of kids on the spectrum. She's quite high on the spectrum. Her passion was maths and philosophy, actually, maths, but especially, and history, but mainly maths. And they put her in the bottom set for maths, where you could do something called foundation maths, which means you couldn't get higher than a C grade. And you needed to get higher than a C grade to go to do A levels, and there's no way she could get in to do maths at university. We were only a C grade, but that was the top of it. And we fought and fought and fought, and the school would not put her up. They said, well, yes, she's doing really well there, but it might be too much. They had every excuse in the book. The truth was they didn't have a place in the higher set. They couldn't. I think the rules were you couldn't have more than 30 children in the class. So the only way my daughter could go up is if someone else went down, and there was no one to go down. So they wouldn't do it. So we privately arranged for her to do her GCSE privately. And yes, she got an A star. She graduated in, she specialised in quantum physics at university, went to a top university. We had huge struggles with A levels. I did not manage to find a pathway to support her. The rules were so inflexible. In England, it might be in Scotland. She got through her GCSEs because at that time you could stagger them. So you could do some a year early, some in May, some in June. And because her stress needs were so severe, she'd need about 3 or 4 days gap between exams to recover. They changed the rules for A levels. It all had to be done in one sitting. So all 15 exams would have to be done in 2 weeks, and they would not make any exceptions for hidden disabilities at all. So she didn't do as well as she'd hoped. She still did okay. She was really upset. She's incredibly ambitious. She was predicted A stars. She didn't get them. She got ABC, which under those circumstances were good. She still was furious with herself, furious with me, furious with the universe, but that was one I could not crack, actually. Anyway, we had huge challenges at university. I ended up having to take the university to court, and I found out what to do, and I would want to share that with you guys if you are facing organizations that do not recognize and make reasonable adjustments to your child's hidden disability. Anyway, she's currently doing a PhD in what is she doing? I don't understand it. It's all beyond me. It's a quantum maths, whatever that is, and philosophy. So it's a PhD related to philosophy. So she's picked up her interest in philosophy, and she's doing that, and that will lead, we hope, to an academic career in that field. So she's doing great.
Fantastic.
Academically, she's not doing great on a personal level, actually. She still has all those difficulties, and she's having difficulty accepting a lot of her challenges, actually. So that's an ongoing challenge for her. I did what I could while she was under my orbit. She's now living independently, and she is no longer in agreement with a lot of things I said and did, which in a way is wonderful, because I've always encouraged my children, take what serves you, ignore what doesn't, and think it through for yourself. Most people have an agenda if they give you an opinion, and she's taken it. So I'm pleased. I'm happy. She's doing great. So that's her story. So,
Naomi, thank you so much for that. I think that's a perfect place to end there, unless you've got something else to share, because I know we talked about, okay, sorry. I've got an echo in the room. I know you talked a lot about hope in your book.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, you probably haven't been able to see, but in the comments here as we're going along,
Yes.
there's been lots of people that have just got exactly that from your share, hope, you know, and thinking about how, you know, our child's needs. Sometimes we think, oh gosh, you know, where will they be in 10 years time? What, you know, what are they going to do? And it is, you know, empowering to think that your children are where they are, and that it's not about the fact that they have done PhDs or that they're top film directors or anything like that. It's about that they're happy in their own skin, you know, and whether or not it's working in McDonald's or a coffee shop or being a film director, you know, they're all good things. So we'll have some time for some, let's go ahead and end the recording if we can.